I'm Paul Manners. I'm co-director of the NCCP and I'll be chairing today. I'll be sharing some information about the REF, but as much as possible I'll be trying to invite our panel to speak and to share their experiences. So just a taster of who's here today. We've got Anne, who's a sub-panel chair in REF 21, who will be sharing her experiences. We've got Doris, who is a member of the REF 29 People and Diversity Advisory Panel. People and diversity is a really important part of the REF, and Doris will help us understand what that means in relation to this recruitment process. We've got Lisa and Lesley, who were impact assessors in REF 21, and we've got Ben, who was a member of the main panel B. So we'll come to them shortly. The next slide, please, Zoe. And we'll start just a little bit from me about what is the process. And a lot of that information is online, so I won't go into too much detail. The panel will then talk to us about why you might want to join a panel, and then we'll go deeper into the technicalities. There'll be a room for Q&A later, and we're going to close at 11:30. Just a tiny bit about the NCCPE to explain why we've hosted this event. We were set up over 15 years ago to support universities to be more open and inclusive in their works. This is our landing page. We believe in an open, responsive, connected and engaged university sector, and we love the REF for that reason. And the next slide sort of shows you perhaps the connection between our mission as an organisation and what the REF is trying to do. Many of you will know the REF inside out, but it has three profiles. One of them is about knowledge, and that's the one at the bottom, the contribution to knowledge and understanding, and that's 50% of the total. But there are two other profiles, one of them looking at the engagement and impact that universities do with their research, and the third, which is developing in this version of the REF, is called people, culture and environment, and that is very focused on the conditions, the culture and the ways of working in the sector. And at the moment, people are being recruited for the different REF panels. Just to give you a little bit of background, there is a recording that will be online very shortly from an event that the REF team ran on Monday, and Zoe will put the link to that in the chat to their resources page, but you'll be able to go and look at that, and that gives you more on the technicalities. The next slide shows us, I think, just a little bit about the process itself. It's an open recruitment process, and I think Doris will particularly help us understand what that means. But I think a real focus on diversity and inclusion as part of it, and the key principles of the REF, confidence in the quality of the outcomes of the process, a transparent and fair process, and a breadth of participation, diversity and inclusion. And the key way in which the REF achieves that is through the many, many people who join the panels, who shape the guidance, and then who oversee the assessment. So if you did join the REF, you'd be joining it on these terms, and you'd be contributing, I hope, really to the rigor, the accountability and the openness of the whole process. The next slide tells you just a little bit about the timetable. It's called REF 29. It kind of comes to a close in 29 when the results are published. But between now and then, there's an awful lot of work to do. At the moment, the panels are being recruited. We've got the main panel chairs in place. The sub-panel chairs are about to be announced. But what we're doing now is bringing in the members who will work with those people to set the guidance. So the criteria setting is the first phase of work that will be kicked off once the panels get working. And then it's in 27 that the guidance will be published and universities will start pulling their submissions together. So as a panel member, things go quiet for a while, and then you come back in to do the assessment once the submissions have been made. And the assessment process is in 28 and 29. The next slide shows us just a little bit about who's already in post. We've got four main channel chairs, sorry, and the four main panels go across the disciplines, a kind of health sciences and biology, a kind of more physical sciences and chemistry, a social science panel and an arts and humanities panel. And each of those main panels has around 6 or more sub-panels. And Anne, for instance, was a sub-panel chair in main panel D in 2021. And what we're talking about today is particularly the recruitment of specialist experts for the main panels, and the main panels oversee the work of the sub-panels, so they're particularly sort of critical in the criteria setting and getting a real coherence across the REF. But the sub-panels then do deep and really important work in their discipline areas, and those sub-panels are recruiting members, and they're recruiting members who could be academic staff with sort of deep expertise in the discipline, but also specialists in engagement, impact, culture, and in the application and impact that research can realise through excellent engagement. Later in the process, there will be impact and specialist assessors that are also brought into the mix. That won't be until 2027, but there'll be a second wave of recruitment, we understand, where the sub-panels bring in extra help, for instance, to assess impact case studies. And so there'll be a second opportunity for you if you don't choose to apply at the moment to be an impact assessor, probably later in 27. So almost finished on this preamble. But just to say that the next slide shows in a little bit more detail what we're talking about. So we've got the main panels, and the main panels are looking for these specialist experts in people, culture and environment, in research use, application and wider benefits, so-called impact assessors, and in interdisciplinarity. They're very interested in the diverse approaches to research. And then for the sub-panels, it's members of those panels, and they will bring the kinds of experience that are shared in the column on the right-hand side. They emphasize they're looking at community-based experience, diverse lived experiences, understanding of diverse research practices, etc. So a real open invitation, really. And we're about to go to the panel and get them to reflect a little, but just turning to the next slide. It just gives you a little flavour of what's going to happen if you were to join the panel. So you'll have the pleasure of joining a number of panel meetings, which will be virtual and in person, where you come together to kind of work collaboratively under the leadership of people like Anne. The time commitment is significant over the course of the exercise. It's estimated to be between 40 and 60, but that varies by panel. So that's an estimate. And it's split into 1/3 for the criteria setting, which will be happening this year and into the early part of next year, perhaps, and then 2/3 for the assessment phase that comes later. So that time is split over a significant period of time. So I think it's time to introduce the panel properly and to give them a chance to talk. I think, Zoe, we should put into the chat just a couple of really useful links. And thank you, everyone who's been introducing yourself in the chat. That's wonderful. But just to say that there will be the chance to ask questions. Some of you have already asked us questions and we've put answers up already. So there's a Padlet, a kind of whiteboard, and Zoe will put the link to the Padlet into the chat. And if you go and look at that, you'll see some of the questions that have already been asked have been answered with input from the REF team, for which we're really grateful. But you can use that Padlet to click on the plus sign to add a question, or you can use the chat, and Zoe will be helping us harvest any of those questions and make sure we try and feed them in. We won't answer everything today, we won't have time, but we'll log all of the questions and we'll update the Padlet after the event, and we'll send you all of the slides as well. So enough from me. I think I'm going to turn to Anne first and just invite you, Anne, as a sub-panel chair, to kind of talk about why you think people should think about applying to be a member of a panel, and what you value about having panelists with the calibre of the people who've joined us today in this room.
Hi, Paul. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And nice to see lots of people, familiar names in the attendees today. So, yeah, I was fortunate enough to chair 2021 for art and design, history, practice and theory, I think it's called. That's the full name. And we had a big panel, and we had, I think one of the things, just to explain about the art and design panels, it had some members who were impact related. Some people, they were called user members, which is a horrible name. But it was the name that was first, I think, associated with REF. We had some members that were full panel members, and we had some that were impact assessors. We had a mixture of those, and I do encourage people to do both. So there are different options about how some of those things happen. I think the first question, I mean, the way you'd put it to us is, why are panel members important? The first thing is they are the core of the REF. Without doubt, they form and do most of the work, in that kind of sense that you get that extraordinary opportunity to see the kind of 360-degree of research as it is done in your field. And I think that is one, it's an enormous privilege if you are like me. I'm a bit of an old timer now, as you might say, in that sense. So I've been a panel member, I've been a deputy chair, and I've been a chair. And it's just an extraordinary opportunity to see what happens to, lots of you, and I'm sure lots of you on these panels, on the meeting today, have been part of research bids or research partnerships. But suddenly what you see in the REF is what comes out at the other end, and what kind of extraordinary difference it makes, and to whom. So I mean, you actually see the other side of all that kind of bidding and partnership and all those other sides, and I think that is just such an extraordinary privilege and a fascination, and it takes all sorts, and it needs all sorts of views. It really is the 360-degree, and I think the REF 2029 is doing that in a sort of accelerated and expanded form, and I'm really pleased to see that. It's been there, it's been coming for some time, but actually to see it in its fullness is really important. So I think from a REF point of view, and for REF and for the kind of field in which you work, it's an extraordinary opportunity. I think it's also an extraordinary opportunity for panel members, whether you're in or outside HE. For those outside, you get a kind of really interesting experience of what HE looks like from the inside, and indeed some of the extraordinary work they do, but also from you get to understand, I think, how some of those thought processes happen in terms of undertaking research, but also the complementary need for partners, for how you take research into the world, and the kind of strange languages that academics sometimes use, which are not necessarily as useful when you're talking in a kind of public audience or in a professional audience or similar. So I think that's quite extraordinary. The other thing which when you asked me the question, when you sent me the question, I think is really important, is that you make friends for life and you meet amazing people who are also doing what you do. And whether you meet them online, and we did most of REF 2021 online. You don't stay in the most glamorous hotels, so forget any of that, but you do have the most fantastic conversations, whether they're online conversations or whether they're in-room conversations. It's actually a set of people who understand and know their field, care about their field, and care about what happens to it. So it is lots of people try and think about what REF panels want. Don't think about what matters to your field. That's what matters, and how you would want to be treated, and how you would want your institution and your community to be there. And I think there's an enormous care taken for in terms of working through that. I think you also learn an enormous amount. I've learned so much in the times I've done it, and continue to do so every time you open a set of research outputs and you open a set of impact case studies and realize it's amazing.
Thank you so much. Doris, now you've got a slightly different role. You're on this REF panel for 29. I wondered whether you could just say a little bit about that before you then sort of talk about why you think impact, assessors and panel members are so important for the REF.
I will gladly do that, because how do you follow Anne? That's wonderful, complete advertisement of why people should come and join panels is really hard to top. And I absolutely subscribe to all the things that Anne said, although you have much more experience with REF than me. So I am from this wonderfully named People and Diversity Advisory Panel for the REF. Now, our panel looks across the whole of REF and makes recommendations about how processes could be more inclusive, to bring in more of a diversity of voices and perspectives. So we work with the REF team on guidelines, on timelines. We provide training for the panel chairs, for recruiting the panel members, for instance, and we will also be providing input into how assessors might assess REF guidelines. So our next big task over the summer is the input into the code of practice guidance for the institutions. And of course, with the new focus on people, culture and environment, that all takes yet a different sort of role in REF. So there's much more focus on the people and culture environment piece, on things that might touch more on inclusion and diversity than we may have had before, which is just timely because diversity and inclusion is such a hot topic in the news at the moment and really easy to deal with. So the first thing that we thought when we got together as a panel is, we haven't confessed this to the REF team, but it's almost a bit of a misnomer, because it's not about people and diversity as such. It's about a diversity of perspectives and voices. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about criteria and so on. It isn't about counting and saying, have we got X amount of those on and X amount of those? It really is about what Anne also mentioned already, a perspective of curating a chorus of perspectives, obviously, almost, onto what higher education does for itself and for society. And I use the phrase, it takes a village, a lot. So apologies to anybody. I know there are a few people on here who've met me in other capacities, and I use that phrase, but it does take a village to figure out whether what we're doing in higher education is done well, is done inclusively, and it's just the right thing to be doing. And I think that's why it's so important. So I'm spinning this slightly. I'm spinning slightly to why is it important that we have a diversity of people and perspectives, to why is it important that we have panel members. It really is important to have that breadth of perspectives in the REF. And that's why I'm delighted to be here this morning. And I just realized that I haven't actually introduced myself properly. I am Professor of Cultural Economy and Policy at the University of Glasgow. And I'm also the university's academic lead for inclusive research practice, which is probably why I've landed on this panel. Is that what you wanted me to say, Paul?
That's lovely, Doris. Thank you. And so yeah, I think Doris shared some links to some of her amazing work around inclusion that perhaps you could pop into the chat for people, because if you're interested, I think there's some wonderful tools and ways of thinking there that you've curated, Doris.
Thank you. Other thoughts are available, I should say. This is not a free advertisement.
So turning now to our other three panelists who did the job in different ways back in 21, we've invited Lisa, Ben and Lesley to come and share their experiences. And Lisa, I wondered if we could perhaps start with you and just to tell us a little bit about your professional background and what it was that sort of motivated you to join the panel and what the experience meant for you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Paul. It's lovely to be here this morning, everybody. I'm Lisa Jamieson. I currently work freelance as a public engagement strategic specialist across higher education and the cultural sector, supporting organisations with their public engagement strategies. But if I take you back to 2020, which is when I was recruited to be an impact assessor on a REF panel, in 2020, I had just recently begun as a freelancer and I was working with NCCPE as one of their associates. But prior to my freelance work, I had spent a decade at Wellcome, and I had initially joined Wellcome to run the live programme in Wellcome Collection, which is their museum and gallery on the Euston Road in London. And then after that, I became head of engagement for Wellcome. So I was responsible for their public engagement strategy and funding, their support for Wellcome funded researchers to engage the public, capital award funding for museum and galleries, major national initiatives on engagement, particularly for audiences who were underserved by science engagement or by cultural engagement. And we had a strategy for working with the broadcast, film and television industries as well. So I had been leading that work at Wellcome, and I had joined Wellcome to lead the live programme, which was about leading a team to create exhibitions and events in the museum to engage audiences with medicine, life and art, as we called it at the time. So I have a really broad disciplinary expertise across public engagement with research across all disciplines, but a particular depth around health, medicine, medical humanities. And in 2020, I actually applied to be on 2 different REF panels, history, which was the one I was selected for, and also psychology, psychiatry and neuroscience, because those were the 2 different disciplinary areas that I felt most confidence in and most expertise in. And I would definitely encourage you to apply for more than 1 panel if you think you've got confidence and expertise across those, particularly those of you who, like me, don't work necessarily in one particular discipline. I was recruited in the early part of 2020, so only for the assessment phase. I didn't do the criteria setting phase that we're at now. I only did the assessment phase. And I was working with the other panelists on the history sub-panel to assess and grade the impact case studies. We also co-authored the final report that the panel produced. The other panelists were mostly academic historians, but the impact assessors like me came from a whole different breadth of disciplines within HE and outside of HE. We had people from archives, museums, publishing, education. There was a really rich, diverse group of people who were doing it. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. We did all of our work virtually. I never met anybody face to face. That didn't, I don't think, compromise the rigor of the process. I thought it was a really robust process, but it was definitely taxing personally for the panelists. It was hard work. So that's just a little bit about my experience. Paul asked me to talk about, why do you do it? Why would people want to do this? I think there are 4 things that kind of came to me. One is the opportunity to apply your professional expertise to this exercise that matters to the whole higher education sector and that doesn't come up that often. It's only sort of every 7 years or so. It's really good for your profession if you're at the table, if you're there to ensure that good practice in public engagement, research impact, research culture, whatever your discipline is, good practice is recognised and rewarded in this exercise. And I spent a lot of time advocating for public engagement, helping people understand what good practice looked like, what high quality engagement was, constantly going through those discussions. As Anne and Doris have both said, it's an incredibly rewarding process. It really is. It's a privilege to see this work and really dive deeply into a discipline and understand the state of that discipline right across the sector. You get such a breadth of a view, the difference it's making socially, culturally, economically. It really is a privilege to do that. You get to see some specific examples of great practice, but you also get the breadth of developing an emerging practice. You get to see it across different geographies, across different higher education institutes, across different types of impacts. And it's a chance to take a really kind of broad view, to really stand back from the coalface and think long term about this discipline and the change that's happening, talking, as Anne said, with a great bunch of smart, committed people who are all desperate to nurture this discipline and support it and really do the best for the discipline. And then finally, my final point, don't forget the professional opportunities for you taking part in this. And it's really important to keep those in mind, I think, because it is hard work and it is a bit of a slog. And you have to get something back from it. So, it's an opportunity to build your network, to hone your analytical skills and your assessment skills, to develop your advocacy for your discipline, working with different people, develop your understanding of research impact, strengthen your CV, earn some cash because it is a paid opportunity. And those benefits to me and my career have continued long after, you know, we're now 4 years past this cycle. So there are some enormous benefits to you in taking part as well.
Wonderful, Lisa, gosh. And I guess one of our reasons for hosting the event today was not only to encourage those of you who are in the room, but for you to encourage your networks to think about applying. Because I think as both Doris and Lisa have said, it's bringing people in from adjacent sectors to HE who could bring so much and contribute so much to the process. So do please be thinking about people in your own networks that you might encourage to apply. Ben, how about you? You played a slightly different role in the dizzy heights of main panel B.
Thank you, Paul. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, so my name is Ben. I come from an organisation, a tiny organisation called Graphic Science, and we're a specialist consultancy working in public engagement. And I got drawn into the REF. Actually, a piece of advice I'd offer is don't do what I did, which is just apply because you think it's all going to be swanky hotels and top catering, because it's really not. And so once I was appointed onto main panel B, I did have a chat with Paul and say, you know, well, what the hell am I going to do now? And Paul said, well, you're going to advocate for public engagement. And so I did. And actually, that was a really good reason to do it. So I was really glad. Thank you, Paul, for that conversation. And in terms of being on main panel and being an advocate for public engagement as a genuine, legitimate impact in its own right, bearing in mind panel B is all the physical and mathematical sciences. So a lot of those people don't struggle for impact. You know, if you're an engineer, you know, your job is making impact. So they don't kind of fall back onto public engagement too easily or too quickly. So pulling out opportunities for public engagement as a genuine impact of research was quite a challenge. And although everybody on the panel was really supportive, and one reason I would really recommend that you apply is it's the only time in my life I've ever been consistently listened to by professors. They really, you know, everybody around the table is taken really seriously, and we really listen to one another. And I'm so not used to that kind of experience at all. It's quite terrifying at first. So being in there and being in that position was actually really quite liberating. And it was, I think, one of the happiest moments of my REF engagement probably was when we published the guidance on submissions. And there was a sentence in there that I'd written, which was saying that qualitative evidence is as welcome as quantitative evidence of impact. And that was a remarkable accomplishment, given that, you know, I was sitting around a table with a load of people who are really serious number crunchers and have a sort of deep-seated cultural anxiety about engaging with a sample of 50 and whether that's a credible and reliable methodology. So that was really quite liberating and exciting. And the other thing, just to toss in, that I really loved about it is that as a main panel member, you get to sit in on sub-panels. And as an impact assessor, you're occasionally asked not to make a ruling, but to get involved in a debate. And one of the commonest debates I got involved in was where somebody would look at an impact case study and say, so what? And actually recognizing the value of the impact is really, really important. And it's really interesting if you come from a different background to be able to make a case for the impact somebody's got. And I think I'll give you one very, very quick example, and I'll try to anonymize it as I go along. But we had an impact case study based on some research on a piece of sporting equipment that's used in the playing of the game. And as a consequence of the research, the global governing body for that sport changed the rules. And this is a big sport. It's on the telly every single day. And there were people who sat around the table and went, yeah, but it's only a sport. And there were people saying, yeah, millions of people play this sport. You know, this is an interaction between society and research. And it was really eye-opening in that regard. And we had the same thing about, you know, being advisors on TV shows and film franchises, and, you know, for scientific accuracy. And people would sit there and go, well, it's only a film, who cares? So actually, you need those other voices in the room to do that stuff. And when you get to be that voice, it's liberating and exciting.
Thank you, Ben. Lesley, follow that.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, I'm Lesley. I'm Director of Mesh Associates. And so, like Ben, so it's a little boutique consultancy in knowledge exchange and public engagement. My last proper job was as head of public engagement with research at Wellcome Trust. And I've been in and around public engagement and knowledge exchange for far longer than I care to remember. When I started out, we didn't even call it public engagement. Public engagement was something the Queen did when she opened buildings. And so it's probably 20 years plus. But don't think, you do not need that level of it, that number of years of experience in order to apply. You really don't. In terms of my ref role, so I was a joint impact assessor. Like Lisa, I applied for, in fact, I said I'll do any of them. So I asked you to say, oh, which particular sub-panel do you want to go, and a unit of assessment do you want to go and be an impact assessor? And I said I was cross-disciplinary, I was interested in all disciplines, this is my background, but I will go to anyone that will have me. And 2 came forward. That was biological sciences in main panel A and engineering in main panel B. And it was really interesting being part of 2 panels, because naturally they obviously there's guidance that everybody follows, but just the kind of characteristics and the ethos and the way things are run, there's flexibility for the chairs, the sub-panel chairs and the unit assessment leads to kind of run it, and it depends on the panel members as well. So I love seeing sort of differences across those 2 panels. But like Lisa said, you know, it is a burden, you know, it does take time. So if you were going to think about being a joint impact assessor, I really would make sure there was, I've been very late, because obviously they all happen at the same time, that you've got that time carved out in order to do that. And in terms of why encouraging others to apply, well, like with Lisa and Ben, I'd like to tell you, you know, what motivated me and also my experiences. And number one, for me, I just think there's a lot of sort of mysticism with REF. It's all a bit Wizard of Oz. And I just wanted to look behind that curtain and see if it really was this bloke, which could have been Stephen Hill, pulling these levers and pressing these buttons. And of course, it's not this mystic process. But I just really wanted to go and see it from the other side. And that was really interesting to me. And also, I'm just genuinely interested in research impact and evidence and impact and research assessment as well. The other thing, so I didn't go in specifically with a very strong feeling of wanting to champion public engagement, but I did go in absolutely determined to make sure it would have a really serious, fair hearing. And actually there were many, many times that I did end up sort of advocating for it. But I definitely went in thinking public engagement, I want it to have a fairer hearing. Funnily enough, Ben, I also went in wanting to advocate or make sure qualitative evidence had a fair hearing as well. And I really championed that one. And I totally agree with what Anne said and everyone's been saying. REF, apart from its guidance that it does, everything else is about the people. It really is. It's totally and utterly a people process. And in terms of my experiences, like the others, you know, really fulfilling experience, meeting and working with everybody. I can't tell, you know, the quality of the discussion is so top notch. You know, there's so much care. You know, the committee meetings where you turn up and no one's read the papers, that just doesn't happen. But also the kind of process, it's such a thoughtful process, irrespective of what you might hear from likely those that have never been part of the REF. It's such a thoughtful process. The chairs are so trained, they've thought about, and you have so much that you're able to contribute. And the other thing, again, with what Ben says, that I would like to say with my experience is that I started as the head of public engagement research at the University of Oxford. I then finished up as a consultant when I was doing my ref role, but it was total equity. And funny enough, Rachel Reed has written a book that people are talking about on LinkedIn about, you know, surviving and thriving in professional services. And it talks about that hierarchy in universities, in academic professional services stuff. I never, ever felt that in a ref panel. In fact, I felt so valued in terms of the impact and engagement experience I could bring. And it did make me feel really unsettled to start off with, because it's such an unusual feeling, being from that side of academia. And yeah, so I just wouldn't hesitate in encouraging you all to think about applying.
Great, thank you so much, Lesley. And I must say that I feel almost like we're kind of selling the ref to you. I trust Lisa, Ben and Lesley implicitly. We've worked together for many years. I haven't sat on a panel, and I'm finding it really, really encouraging to hear what you actually experienced. So thank you for sharing that. Lisa, there was a question in the chat that I'll just, sorry, in the Padlet about, you talked about actually, despite all of the pleasure of the role, it's actually really extremely hard work and involves an awful lot of focus and concentration, etc. So a little later, we'll come back to just ask perhaps all of you to talk more about the actual really hard work that's involved, so that people, if they do choose to apply, are under no illusions about the actual burden that it creates, because it is not easy work. But thank you, everybody on the panel. Thank you. We've had a few questions on the Padlet. Feel free to add to that or to add them into chat. If Zoe, you could bring the slides back up. I'll just briefly talk to you about the actual physical process of applying, which is actually quite a significant challenge, I think, having looked at it and thought, goodness, this is a seriously challenging and demanding process to actually get your application done. So we're going to reflect on that with you now. And I think, again, I think Zoe's put links into chat, but you can go and you can have a look at the application form. And what I did is I just opened it and I started to just play with the application form and to just begin to work through it, because it comes in about 9 different stages. So you have to keep clicking through, but it gives you a real feel for what's expected of you. So I'd urge you to just go and click through it and have a think about it. But it basically is asking you about your knowledge and understanding relevant to the role, your experience, your skills, and importantly, your motivations. It is like applying for a job. It really is. I don't want you to be under any illusions that this is going to be easy if you do choose to go ahead. The next slide, then again, all of us who've applied for jobs will be familiar with this kind of criteria-led recruitment, and the REF team are trying to be as fair and transparent and robust about this as possible. And so they have ended up listing a great deal of criteria, which when you look at them in the round feel quite overwhelming potentially, because it's hard to think that you could possibly be able to demonstrate real expertise in all of these areas. But I think we're going to reflect on that with the panel, and we're going to encourage you not to be intimidated by this. If you want to look at this, there's a link on the Padlet on the top right. You can download this, but this is just taken from the REF site. The next slide is just a quick summary from the REF team from the workshop that they ran earlier this week, which was what makes a great application. And you'll be familiar with this from your own, your own careers, I'm sure. Be specific, make it easy for the person who's reading it. Explain why it's relevant. Don't just list what you've done. We're following a strict process. We can't extrapolate. So yeah, don't take for granted what you mean. You be explicit as possible, answer the questions directly. And what shaped you and how have you shaped others? I think it's a really interesting question, but I think having met our panel today, you probably understand what that means. These are people who really care about their professional kind of engagement with research and with engagement and with culture and with impact. And they're people who really want to influence others and be influenced themselves. I think that's the really nice thing that I've picked up from this, is that the panels really listen. So it is not about just going in and banging the drum. It's about making a robust case, but also equally really tuning in and listening to others. So what we're going to do now is go back to the panel and ask them to help us think about how you might approach the application process. And I might go back to Anne and then to Doris just to reflect on what advice you would give to people who are thinking about applying. These criteria can appear a little daunting. How would you advise people to sort of begin to build the case for their application? And perhaps I could start with you again, and then I'll come to Doris.
Sure. The first thing, and I think you've already said it in a way, and several people have said it in their own ways, is be yourself. Don't just because there's that horrible list in front of you, and it is daunting. It's daunting however many times you've done it. So I've done it a few times in various situations. I think the other thing is you've said it. Don't list activity. Think about what you are passionate about in terms of why you're passionate about a sector, and we've heard it. Qualitative and quantitative evidence. What is it you understand about those kind of processes, and what insights can you give? And really try and flip that over from a kind of sense of I've done this and I've done that and I've done the other. Actually, it's the thing. I mean, I have chosen several panels, and the thing that's really interesting about it is that's not what you choose. You choose people because their application stands out for their energy, insight, passion, commitment, actually, to some of the things that we've heard in those presentations. It's just that sense, I really care about what happens to this, and I'm really interested in it. And it takes time to make an application. I mean, I'd get somebody else to look at it. And I don't mean, somebody like me. I mean, ask somebody who's kind of outside that says, does this sound like me? I mean, it's that sort of sense of a genuine application. It's so much more important than, I've been on this panel, I've been on this, I've been on 10 committees and blah, blah, blah. That's not what the REF is about. The REF is about that sense of engagement with a subject. And I mean, I think it's really important, and I'm conscious, I mean, Doris will probably say more about this, but I think that sense of different perspectives you bring are so critical in this REF more than any others. So it's that sort of, on the one hand, it's a sector. On the other hand, it's, you may have professional services experiences in a university, you might have small charity experience, working with communities, or working with, take two ends, big museums, publishing, small and specialist communities, and how you can get deep into something. I mean, it is worth remembering, impact is both about depth and intensity, if you like. Reach and significance is the kind of classic title, but actually it's about reach and significance and the how you engage, not what you do, but how you do it, is one of the critical things, and I think more critical this time than ever before, probably. So I'll probably leave it there.
Thanks. Doris, what would you say to kind of help people think about the challenge that the criteria set, really?
Yeah, so in terms of the process of applying, I've got a fairly irreverent attitude to those types of applications, and that is partly because of what has been mentioned before, which is it is a job and it will take time, and you will be banging your head on the table at some point, and you would much rather go and do something else. So my line with that kind of stuff is always, I'll tell them who I am and under which condition I'll do it. And if that's not what they want, then that's probably better, because otherwise I'll end up in these head on the table, I'd much rather go outside and eat ice cream situations for the wrong reasons. So if that is what's happening, and it is as rewarding as Anne explained it to be in the beginning, I can already see that after just a few months in the role. There is that, but there's also the other bits. So I think you want to get in it for the right reasons. So you want to be accepted very much, as Anne said, for what you want to bring to the table. And if that's not what they're looking after, my line would be, I'm sure your expertise can be very, very valuable in a different context. The second one I spoke of, part of that irreverence piece, is I think there's a line in the guidance which says you have to refer to all the criteria. I would encourage you to read referring as referring and not fulfilling. So that's not the same thing. So you can say, I know you're also asking for ABC, but I've already told you how amazing I am on XYZ, and that's my specialism. And ABC is just not going to come from me. That's going to come from somebody else. So don't be daunted by that. If you're fulfilling enough criteria, I'm sure you've got a reason to be there. And then don't be daunted by not fulfilling one or two others. The Second piece I wanted to say is around perspectives and diversity. And I'm going to try and keep the lecture short, but we are way too focused on certain diversity characteristics at the moment and on people disclosing those characteristics. That's not what the application is about. If you identify as disabled, you do not have to say that in this context. I would encourage everybody to start from the perspectives they bring, not from their identity characteristics. So in the disability example, if that is something you don't actually want to speak to, and you may have very good reasons not to, then don't feel forced to disclose that. Maybe what you're actually wanting to talk about is your experience of coaching your niece's football team in your spare time, which is trying to really create girls going into football in an area of socioeconomic deprivation. That is a diversity perspective that you can bring. And if you want to talk about that, that's grand. So please don't read the exercise as an encouragement to sort of discourage, disclose information about very personal information about yourself that you don't actually feel comfortable with. Our advisory panel would be very, very upset if that were what is happening. And the other piece to that diversity of perspectives point is, yes, it's about identity characteristics, but it's also that, and again mentioned that, different career paths, different jobs. It's also about different institutional sizes, for instance. A lot of the conversation we have on the panel is about what happens when this guidance goes out into a very small specialist organization or institution, as opposed to a really big sort of all singing, all dancing, well-endowed Russell Group institution. So there's lots of different ways from and corners from which you can come to this. Find yours and then explain it. Don't feel shoehorned into something by the form or by the criteria.
Great. Thank you, Doris. So let's keep going. Lesley, if it's okay, I thought I might come to you next, and just to get your reflections. You've gone through this process. You've had a look at the criteria this time round. What would be your advice to people who are thinking about applying?
Thanks, Paul. And so I think the one thing I would say, so certainly in REF 2021, they referred to impact assessors. Quite often they use this language of being a research user, which I didn't identify with and still don't identify with now, but that didn't worry me. And so basically I pivoted. I knew that someone like me and us and the knowledge, experience and skills that I had could be and would be useful for the REF as an impact assessor. And so I pivoted basically what the criteria was asking for in terms of this, are you a research user perspective? And I pivoted round to what I could bring in terms of my public engagement, knowledge exchange, research impact, experience expertise, evaluation expertise, that kind of thing. And then also working with, obviously, because you're in public and community engagement, with research users and with researchers to encourage engaged research. So, yeah, so it said adding on to what Doris was saying about referring to not fulfilling, also think about ways that you can pivot and to be about you and what you could bring. And I think the second thing I would say is just absolutely, I think nearly every single engaged researcher, public engagement professional I've met has always been passionate about what they do, really, really, really believing in it and just getting that across as well, and that as part of your passion, your motivation. And the third thing to think about, we've talked about, the burden, the time that it takes. I think there's something to think about in terms of, yes, there's a case to be made in your application. Also think about the potential case that you might want to make if you're in an institution where you're in that manager, actually, to ensure in what way that if you do get onto a REF panel, in what way that role, adjustments can be made, because without a doubt there's benefit for you, for your professional development, all that thing, but there's absolutely going to be benefits for your institution for you to take part of that. So there could be a way of thinking of a case to be made to both of those, one to the REF and one to your institution, to ensure you have that time if you feel you need that as part of your job in order to do the panel member responsibilities.
Great, thank you, Lesley. Yeah, very helpful. I was talking to somebody the other day who is, quite wonderful, brilliant professional who works in a university who said, I was thinking of applying, but I saw the term research user and I thought, oh, that doesn't apply to me, therefore I'm not going to apply. And I said, no, that absolutely is not. You're exactly the kind of person that the ref needs. So it is interesting, isn't it, how the language, it does look clunky when you read it. It does feel quite exclusive. It does feel like you need to be on the inside of this world. But I think everything we've heard today is that actually what the ref teams want is people who are working in and on the edge of, and who can bring all kinds of diverse and different kinds of expertise. But I think what you do need is a kind of passion for what the ref is about, which is to build a more open, inclusive research system. So bring it on, I'd say. Ben, what would you say?
I would say there's no point doing it if you don't enjoy it. It is quite hard work. There is a fair amount to do. I mean, it's easier for me than for many people because I'm just very lazy, so I just don't do the work. And that seems to work out fine most of the time. But also, I wouldn't get too bogged down in the idea that it's a huge kind of mountain of effort. It's really not. And I guess that given the particularities of this particular meeting, most of us are here interested in public engagement and therefore probably looking at being impact assessors. Reading impact case studies is not like reading research outputs at all. It's much, much lighter work. And also assessing is not reviewing. It's, again, much, much lighter work. I mean, some of our assessors on panel B were taking 500-600 research outputs and having to assess them within 3 months. And that sounds like an enormous amount of work, but actually once you get going on it, you can clip through it and you can get quite a lot done and you're not that it's not one output, one assessor. Every output is read by several different people. So there's still plenty of chance for rigor and calibration around all of that. So whilst it sounds like a lot, it's not that hard. My concern really, I think, more is that academic researchers do seem to get some slack from their employers because they recognize the value of contributing to REF. And I think freelancers, and I worry about professional services staff, whether they get that same level of support. As a freelancer, yes, you do get paid for it. It's really not very much. It doesn't make, but then, when you're freelancing, you have such irregular and erratic income streams anyway that maybe it's helpful, maybe it isn't, I don't know. But as a freelancer, you're probably really good at measuring and balancing your time. And that's what you need to be able to do to get through this. So I would not be put off by all of that. And in terms of the application, yeah, I would agree with everybody else. I think Sun Tzu, wasn't it, said you should always attack your enemy at their strongest point. And I think in this case, that's exactly what you do. You need to play with a straight back, take this back to them and say, look, this is what I'm bringing to the table. You cannot live without me.
Thank you, Ben. And Lisa, I'll come to you in a second. Just there's a really helpful comment in chat, which is just the sheer technicalities of it. Craig, you were just reflecting on, actually, it's only 1900 characters with spaces, and it's a hard cut off. And actually, if you've done it in Word and it says 1900 characters, it might not actually read it like that when you actually put it into the form. So be aware that there will be all kinds of technical tricks up the ref's sleeve that might make the application even harder. So give yourself plenty of time. Don't leave it to the last minute, would be my advice. We've got various questions coming in. It's great that one of the ref team, Jess, is here with us today and who's listening in and will work with us after the event to make sure we answer all of those on the Padlet. So rest assured we will get answers to you, and there'll be answers that have been approved with the ref team so that they're absolutely as accurate as we can make them. So we will get onto that. And early next week, we'll have answers to the questions we don't get to. But Lisa, just wondered about your advice for people who are thinking of applying, and also just to build on what Ben was saying about actually the labour that is actually involved, whether you could reflect on that, and we'll begin to draw things to a close.
Yeah, there is labour, but I think it's more volume rather than complexity and difficulty. It's the volume of work to review, the amount of work to be done. So you will need to carve out proper time for it. This can't be done in the margins of a full-time job after a week's work. You will need to carve out proper proper time for it. And therefore, as Lesley says, discuss that with your managers in advance to get their permission for that. But one of the good things about the REF is it's such a large process that it's really well planned, really far in advance. So there are no surprises, no sudden deadlines, no unexpected changes to the programme. It's well planned, and you can plan I planned my time over a number of months very easily to fit with that REF timetable. Like Ben, I was freelancing at the time, so I just pulled back from other client work, accepted the hit financially. I daren't work out what the hourly rate was, but I had lots of other motivations for undertaking this exercise, and there were lots of other benefits to me beyond the financial benefits to it. So it is a volume of work more than anything to carve out the time for. And also it moves at a very steady pace. We had lots of calibration exercises, moderation exercises, presentations from people about what policy impact looked like for those of us who weren't policy impact specialists. We had time just with the impact assessors to share our experiences. So there's lots of support and guidance there through the process. My chair was available for one-to-one calls, and my deputy chair had been through it several times before. She was so wise and generous, sharing that wisdom with us throughout to ensure that we were building on the previous round's experience. Every meeting we came together at the beginning to check in. We were doing it all virtually. Sometimes we were on these calls for 3 days. That was incredibly taxing. I hope this time around there'll be some face-to-face meetings. But one of our lovely panelists did a yoga session every lunchtime for us to kind of stretch. So we looked after one another. I think as people have referred to the other people who were in it, we were well supported as a sub-panel by everybody on it. So I'd encourage everybody, I'd encourage you to go for it. It's a positive experience.
Great, Lisa. Thank you so much. And we'll draw things to a close now. As I say, we will get answers to all of the questions on Padlet. I prefer to get them answered with the REF team so that we're being absolutely clear with you and it's approved by the REF team. So we'll get that done early next week. And we'll also send emails with the slides and a reminder of some of the key kind of points that have come up today. Could you bring the slides back up, Zoe? We'll just very briefly summarise where we've got to and point out a couple of things that are coming up that might be of interest to you. And then I really want to just say, as Zoe brings those slides up, a very, very warm thank you to our panellists who I think have certainly inspired me by their take on this. I wasn't sure what they'd say, but it's been really encouraging to hear that. So thank you, everyone. Just to say, we, as I said, care about the REF greatly because it does encourage, I think, really thoughtful, reflective and evolving practice. And it is about bringing all of us who care about research and its value together to make it as good as it can possibly be. So we've got lots of resources on our website that you might be interested in. The links are in the chat, so you can take a look at them. We'll also be running another REF event later in April, looking at the people, culture and environment profile and sharing thoughts about how that's evolving. Later this year, we'll be talking much more around the engagement and impact profile because the guidance for that's also being formulated this year. So please join us again for future events. The next slide just gives you a flavour of our network for public engagement professionals. And I think, Zoe, you were just going to talk to that briefly before we close.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so this event came out of the PEP network, the Public Engagement Professional Network for the NCCPE. Some of you aren't members of that network, so you're more than welcome to join. It's a network for people working in engagement in universities, engaged researchers, knowledge exchange people, all of those sorts of people. There's about 1,000 people in there at the moment. We run an events program, we have newsletters, and there's a closed LinkedIn group. So please do join that group. And the link's in the chat.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day. Have a lovely weekend.